Hey, welcome to the Heroes Wellness Collective podcast. And today's guest, we have Matthew Butler. Matt's a career Green Beret. And talk about his journey from transitioning out of the military, some struggles with transition through finding plant medicine, and his journey up to this point. So Matt, multiple tours in Afghanistan, now plant medicine shaman.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Doom. I appreciate it. And long time listener, first time caller type of thing. Just and for the audience, what I mean by that is Fred and I didn't directly serve together, but we were in each other's periphery for most of my career and always had the utmost and tremendous amount of respect for you. So thanks for having me. Yeah, so how did we get here, man? That's a good question. Yeah, I spent 27 years in the military, 20 of those in soft special ops formations. So from 98 to 2017 was my soft career. Getting out was rough. Getting out was really hard. I've been clinically diagnosed as with complex PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, suicidal ideation, and addiction and alcoholism. They're all in my military record, but I didn't buy into any of them. I had resistance to the therapists and those that were diagnosing me, and I think it's part of our being what's ingrained in us in the soft community about like you can't show weakness, right? How many times have you seen dudes on a 12-mile road march pull over side of the road, wrap their feet in 100-mile-an-hour tape, stuff it back in a boot, and cinch it up and drive on, right? Like that's the mentality. It's the expectation. So I think there was a lot of that in me from the time I was diagnosed in 2011 up until and after I got out in 2017, where I was just, yeah, whatever. What do they know? They don't know. I'm obviously highly functioning. I'm achieving. I'm in the tip of the spear type units. So really, how can they be right? So suppressed that all down, got out, retired. I didn't plan to come back to Utah, but circumstances brought me back here anyway. And 2018, I was arrested after an altercation with my father. We got into an argument actually on Father's Day of 2018. I went back in August to try to mend the fence, and instead of mending the fence, the argument escalated. I was trying to do my best in the moment to what the therapist had taught me, right? I knew I had all the signs of, okay, here's my checklist. I know I'm about to explode here. Let me leave. And so on my way out of his house, I dropped a few choice words. He's a God fearing Christian man, and he wasn't having that. So he told me to get my ass back here, meaning let me have. He wanted an apology. That's not what I heard. It's not what he said, and it's not what I heard. If I have fight, flight, and he's taking away flight, then all I'm left with is fight. So I turned and punched a wall. I didn't hit another human being, but I punched a wall. And in Utah, the laws are such that if there's destruction of property during a domestic disturbance, you automatically go to jail. So yeah, I found myself sitting in a jail cell contemplating my life decisions.
Seems like a rapid descent in a year, right? From fully functioning on active duty Green Beret to being at that point. So of your deployments, can you now go back and say, hey, this is one of the times that really impacted my mental health in a negative way?
Yeah. So I had 6 deployments, one to Iraq in '03 and '04 on OIF-1, and then the 5 subsequent deployments were all Afghanistan, and the one that I think that broke me the most was the last one. Even though it wasn't necessarily challenging tactically or for some of the other more traditional reasons, it was just that in the soft community, we're used to doing those quick burn and turns, right? 3-month deployments, 6-month deployments. And those felt okay to me psychologically or emotionally because about the time that you start to really miss home, miss your family, start to break down physically and emotionally, the light at the end of the tunnel is already there, and you can see the finish line. My last deployment in 13 and 14 was 13 months, and that one really caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting the sort of the mental toll. The other thing too that actually made it hard on the front end is I had been drinking so heavily, and I was a typical, what I would imagine is a typical SF guy. I was drinking on deployments, every single one of them up until that last one. I was drinking. We have our ways and means, so and then it got to the last deployment, and I was on General Austin Miller's staff with NSOC Alpha, with Middle Special Operations Command in Kabul. And as a lieutenant colonel, you're like the lowest ranking dude in the tent, so to speak. Well, there's admirals and generals and colonels, and so taking the risk of drinking on that small, like it was a small little postage stamp of a fob, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's yeah, it's a couple hundred meters. Yeah, yeah, a couple hundred meters by a couple hundred meters. So I felt like the risk of drinking, and at this point, I know that I'm only a couple years away from retirement, and if you get booted out on year 19, in those days, you don't get any retirement. And so the risk definitely outweighed the reward on that. So going into it, I had a severe detox period going in because I wasn't going to drink. And so I know that I spent several weeks with the shakes and things like that. So for a lot of reasons, that last deployment really, really affected me adversely. Yeah.
Do you ever really remember talking about ways to deal with mental health issues, or anyone sort of bringing that to the front, or there being any sort of talk about that?
No, I was pondering on this, and I think that the one things or the things that I look back on as what we were doing to deal with our mental health that I can recall were, I guess, just like those quiet, intimate times with your brothers. Whether it was like going on a convoy, coming back, and then after everything, after AR and gear had been accounted for and maintenance and everything, the one thing you had was, okay, well, I'll meet you at the bonfire and we'll smoke a cigar and download in that way, probably what we would call today integration. Barbecues, we would have a half day off on most of my rotations to do laundry and whatnot. And we had when I was stationed in Bagram on a couple tours, and they had the old GB club back there on the backside. And so we'd make an effort to, okay, well, let's get some hamburgers and hot dogs and play a little volleyball. It was those kind of things that I think was our informal way of tending to our mental health. But honestly, it was what stands out most with that question is the prevailing attitudes of not wanting to address it, or the taboo around addressing it. I don't know how many times I heard, "Hey, if you go to the psych, you're gonna lose your clearance, and if you lose your clearance, you can't be on the teams, or you can't go on missions, deployments." The first time I felt that change or noted a change was with when I was in JSOC. So this was pretty late in my command, this or in my career. This was like in probably I was in JSOC from I think 10 to 13. And at the time, the JSOC command sergeant major, he pulled an all hands meeting. And I mean, credit to that dude. It was Command Sergeant Major Thetford. And he pulled an all hands meeting, and he stood in the big hangar and on the stage and told everybody in there, "Hey, my mental health is suffering. Here are the things I'm doing to address it. It's not what you think. You're not going to have your security clearance pulled." And I was, wow, okay, all right. I mean, that was the first time I ever remember feeling a safe conversation around mental health with a leader in the soft community.
Yeah. And you mentioned
Yeah.
a breaking point for you, this altercation with your dad. Was that was that your epiphany? Was that when you like considered that something was wrong?
Well, I wanna answer what I took away from the jail cell, but then tell you where I knew something was really wrong.
Yeah.
So in the jail cell, yeah, what I say is I had two major epiphanies that day. One was, okay, you are not being honest with yourself first and foremost, and you're not being honest with those around you because you're really dangerous. I mean, and I think that's I think that's the appropriate word. I mean, I'm not as tall as you, but I'm a fairly tall man, large man, and I think I have a finely honed amount of rage. And so I wasn't being honest with myself. And then the second thing was I realized that it was that traditional definition of insanity where we keep doing the same thing over and over and over, but somehow expecting a different result. I mean, I was going to group meetings, I was going to AA meetings, I was taking antidepressants, I was seeing a therapist. I was doing all the things that the VA taught me to do, told me to do, but nothing was changing, nothing was putting a dent in it. So those were the two epiphanies I had in the jail cell. Where I think that things got the darkest for me, or where I had an epiphany about how big this monster was that I was wrestling with was actually the fall previous. It was the Veterans Day previous. So November of 17, Veterans Day, what was going on in my life was again more alcoholism. I was going through my third divorce. I was about to go through my third divorce, and the writing was on the wall. We were in a highly contentious relationship, just at each other's throats constantly. Then I was in a career that wasn't aligning with me, that was really kind of sucking the life out of me. And then I had all this PTSD rage going on. And Veterans Day just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And what I did is going, I ended up grabbing a gun and a bottle of sleeping pills because if you're going to do something, do it right. Well, I mean, I was going to take the pills and then fire around and to make sure that I couldn't come back from it. And I drove I was going to go up in the mountains near my childhood home called the Uintas. I was going to go up there and find a quiet place. And literally the last public land before you enter into this national forest is there's a bar, the best bar in the world. I love this place. It's called the Notch, and it's a locals only dive. Well, I mean, I'm going to do this anyway. I might as well stop off and have a drink. And so, I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's going to be a party. Let's get the party started. So I stopped off at the Notch, and there might have been 8 locals in there, and then a bartender and the owner, and then me. So you're talking like 11 people. And then at some point in the evening, some reggae band from California started playing. And we're talking about this real hit town in northern Utah where I don't think anybody in there could spell reggae if they had to. And and I was like, okay, this is really surreal, like, but whatever. And I'm gonna drink and listen to music, and they were playing. And for whatever reason, the singer, she was is a woman, she stopped halfway through their set, and they were gonna go on break, and she said, "Hey, today's Veterans Day, and I just want to pause and thank our veterans for the freedoms of this country. Sure, this country's got problems and things like that, but one thing we can all agree on is how fortunate we are to have the freedoms that we do, and that comes from the veterans, and today's Veterans Day. I want to honor them." And I just broke down, man. I was like, I couldn't control it. I was just bawling my eyes out at the end of that bar, trying to conceal it. And so I drank until the bar shut down. I went out in my truck and I slept it off. And the next day, I still had the plan, but now I felt like I wanted to get away. So I drove to Moab, Utah, where we have national park, Arches National Park, and the beauty of that landscape and just being there and being in nature. And I just sat on my truck hood and just watched the sunset that night and just told myself, okay, there's got to be something greater. There's got to be a better solution. And so that's probably as close as I came to ending it. And also the moment where I felt like there was divine intervention that got me through that weekend. And then I got through that weekend. Like I said, it was about 8 months later that I was arrested.
Yeah. So you were starting to identify the problem, and as you mentioned, you were going through essentially everything the VA had told you to do. Were you going through cognitive behavioral therapy? Were you talking to a therapist? You were taking medications for depression. So you'd done the traditional route. Now you're sitting in the jail cell. So what did that feel like? You're sitting in the jail thinking like, what do I do now? How do I get out of this?
Yeah, like it's interesting because you're in fight flight and you're so ramped up and you got like an 8 foot by I don't know, maybe 4 foot, 5 foot cell. And I was pacing back and forth for hours. I couldn't settle down. I didn't want to sit down. And that was all that was running through my mind was how did I get here? Because I've done everything that they've told me to do. You're right. I was in that cognitive behavioral talk therapy model. Like I said, all the meetings, the SSRIs, the antidepressants, the sleeping pills. That's a whole nother story. I was on Ambien for 11 years, which my doctor thought was, or no, 6 years, excuse me, which my doctor thought was insane when I got out. Yeah. And so yeah, like it was, I was just, all I could think was as soon as I get out of here, I've got to solve this problem. And again, it was in my mind, a lot of it was that Green Beret resilience of, okay, like the mission has shifted. Like I really need to address this and I need to address this hard and fast. And I need to find a real solution.
So, plant medicine, for those that don't know, can you kind of give an overview of what plant medicine is? And then how did you come to be, okay, that's my next step?
So plant medicine is essentially another word for psychedelics, but I want to, but with some qualifiers. Like some people might say LSD. Well, people will say LSD is a psychedelic, and it is, but it's not organic. It's a synthesized psychedelic. Well, there's a wide, vast variety of plant medicines out there, but the ones that we tend to focus on most are cannabis, ayahuasca, peyote or San Pedro, psilocybin, Iboga. Those are the ones that really kind of stand at the forefront of the plant medicine space. And then there's another one called Acacia, which is the one that I work with, which is a sister of ayahuasca. They both work on the same active ingredient or the same active molecule, which is dimethyltryptamine, DMT. But so if it's a plant or fungi, it grows organically. If you can take it and consume it as it has grown out of the earth, those are what we call the plant medicines. And so, yeah, how did I wind up here? It was largely like really, it started with Google. I mean, I got out of jail and it was the first thing I Googled was how do you cure PTSD? And I think now there's more AI answers. You can still do this right now. I think if you Google how do you cure PTSD, the AI summary at the bottom at the first before any search result will just basically say, "Well, it's we're really sorry that you have PTSD and there's medications you can take to address it, the symptoms, but there is no cure." And back then, I think I landed on a WebMD page that basically said the same thing. And I was like, okay, this is not good enough. I don't accept this as the answer. And I just kept going. I kept doing different Google searches. How do you cure PTSD? How have veterans cured PTSD? What holistic cures are there for PTSD? What works? I just kept doing it. And then eventually I kept coming up with video results on YouTube that were taking me to post ceremonial ayahuasca interviews with veterans that had gone down to the jungles and at the time, I couldn't even say the word ayahuasca. I was ayahuasca, like I was butchering this word, but I was like, but I knew I kept once that came into my awareness, I latched onto that, and I just kept deep diving it in terms of trying to learn everything I could about it.
So, where does your logical mind saying to you as you start to research, if you can sort of remember where you were in that space?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know exactly. Like, the biggest thing that I thought, I mean, I had resistance to it, but it wasn't what I normally see with other people and their resistance. My resistance was, okay, this seems highly primitive. Like I got to get to South America. I got to get into the Amazon. I got to find a shaman and I've got to go like sit in this Maloka hut and drink this tea. It seemed like so prehistoric to me that I wasn't even sure how to navigate how to do that. And that was my biggest obstacle is how do you even do this? Yeah.
Yeah, and right, the nature of who we are, the type of person that both gravitates to special forces and the way we're trained, right? Skeptical, analytical, maybe cynical, right? So, how are you overcoming that as you walk this path? Is it just that, hey, I this seems like the right answer, so I'm going there and I'll deal with it as I get there, or
Yeah, I think what ended up happening was, like, when I was doing this research and really starting to believe that this is the path forward, it was I'd gotten arrested in 2018, so it was really by 2019 that I was really starting to take a serious interest in doing it. And then, of course, the next thing that happened was, well, then on a personal note, my wife, we were dating at the time, and her son passed away in 2019. So that kind of put things on a back burner as well for a while. And then 2020 rolls around and it's COVID, and so I, like, really put it on a back burner then. Okay, there's no way I'm going to Peru or Guatemala, Costa Rica with COVID. Who knows how that'll turn out? And so in 2020, I took a contract back at Fort Bragg working at the SOMTC, what is now the Special Operations Mission Training Center. They train battalion and group size staffs. So I went back there from June of 20 to June of 21. I was literally on a phone call with my wife at the time, and I heard a voice. Like, there's no other explanation. I just heard this voice that said, "Google ayahuasca retreat Utah." And I was like, first of all, why am I hearing a voice? And second of all, that's the most insane suggestion ever. Nobody's going to advertise this retreat in Utah. But I heard it like 3 times. And so I said, "Listen, babe, I gotta hang up. I gotta do something real quick." She's like, "Okay." So I hung up and I Googled ayahuasca retreat Utah. And sure enough, there was an advertisement, first thing that pulled up. And I called the number and asked, "Hey, I just found this." And it was 6 weeks away. I said, "I just found this. Is there any chance that you have any openings?" And she says, "Yes, we have 1 opening." That was the conversation. It was like 5 minutes of conversation. I didn't ask any questions. I was just, "Oh, this is what I've been looking for the past 3 years." The other thing that happened that was interesting was that civilian job that I mentioned before that. We used to do a thing 1 day out of every month where they would have the staff meeting, but on the first staff meeting of the month, they would do a little celebration birthday lunch, right? And you'd always go around to whoever's birthday, they would have to tell 2 truths and a lie or whatever, party games for the staff. And one of the ladies that was working there, one of her 2 truths and a lie was, "I drank a magic tea in the jungles of Peru that gave me 6 hours of hallucinations." And everybody had said lie, but I was like, truth, because I'd been doing my research on ayahuasca. And so, yeah, so there was like this other little breadcrumb that had, oh, yeah, like, this woman's normal. And so from 2018 till 2021, there were these moments, these breadcrumbs, there were these things that were just kind of leading me along, but also circumstances up until that one day where I just couldn't make it work until then. And then all of a sudden it fell into place, like, just like that, like in an instant.
yeah,
The other thing too is this shaman that led that ceremony, who was from South America. She told me in that ceremony, like, it had to align, and boy, did it align.
explain walking in there, like what it was like for you.
So that's such a great question, and you're right. I went there really out of desperation. Like, that was it. I have got to do something to address this. Nothing seems to be working. I want a solution. So I'm going to do this. And I think that's what really propelled me past all the normal resistance, because yeah, I walked into this place, and first of all, I was obviously one of the more older people in the group. I was right at like 49, I think. It was my birthday weekend, but everybody there was probably most people were in their 20s and 30s. It was mostly women, and most everybody in there was in the woohoo space, where, dreadlocks and lots of tattoos with sacred geometry and names like flower and oneness and on all this. And what was it? One of the funniest stories from that day, and the gentleman that I'm going to refer to, you may already know this story. We were sitting in a group of people. All of us were there. The shaman was going to take us down and show us where the spaces were so we could set up our ceremonial site and then come back up. And so I'm sitting with this group of 20 people, 20 individuals, and one of the co-facilitators was about 5 feet away from me. And he's a great dude. I love him. He's one of my best friends now. And but he talks like a surfer. He's like, "Yeah, dude, like 6 months ago, the Galactic Council stopped nuclear war from destroying our planet." And I picked up my journal and my water bottle and the things I was supposed to bring and got up and moved. Yeah, yeah. I gotta get this. I gotta get away, man. This is too much for me. Okay, like I'm in over my head. I think I even wrote in my journal, "Don't say a word. Be the gray man. Be the gray man. Don't." Yeah, just get through this weekend.
Take the medicine and get out of here.
Yep, yep. Just get what you came for, which is another mistake I made going into ceremony. I made the assumption that drinking this magic tea was essentially the finish line. Yep, I'm gonna drink this, my problems are solved, I get back to my corporate job and building my race car and doing my hobbies and things like that. When in fact, ceremony is really our beginning line, but that's another story. So we go down to ceremony. Now, what I found out was the shaman, she did 3 calls with me. And I thought, well, that's a lot of phone calls. And then I talked to some of the other people in the group. They're like, "You what? You had 3 phone calls?" And so the shaman had been putting an emphasis, unknowingly to me, but on like reading me, doing tarot readings every call and stuff. And so we go down there, and she had also told me leading up to it, she says, "You're not going to have any problem with the purging. You've drank so much ayahuasca in your past lives that this will not be a problem for you." And
So
I
more,
kind of like,
more woohoo right there.
yeah, I wrote that down in my journal and I just put a bunch of question marks around it. And I think I even wrote "This woman's crazy" or something like that. So we go in. She called us up one at a time to drink the medicine. She called a woman to my right first, and then she went around the circle and looked all the way around the circle and then came back and stopped and said, "Okay, Matt, it's your turn." Called me up. And it was strange because she had the medicine, she held it out in her hand, and I went to reach for it with both hands like this, and just before I reached for it, she pulled it back and held it up to get my attention. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Matt, there's no going back." Now, at the moment, I thought, "Yeah, I get it. Like, there's no way." I'd done my research. I knew that once I drank this medicine, there was no way for me to purge it. You're in for 6 hours no matter what. And yeah, yeah, buckle up. And so, but looking back in retrospect, what she was saying was, "There's no going back, Matt. This is going to change your life." And
She was more referring like the Matrix, like you're taking the pill, right? You're
right, right, yeah. So she handed it to me. I drank it, handed it back, and went and sat down. And probably 45 minutes passed, and I'm watching everybody else is in, they're vomiting, they're crying, they're weeping, they're shaking, they're laughing, and I'm just sitting there going, "Damn it, I've been duped, I've been tricked, I was angry." And one of her assistants came over and said, "Hey, Matt, the shaman would like to give you another dose." So I went back up, took another dose, and went back to my place. And within a couple minutes, it was quick. Within a couple minutes, the whole world, it was like you'd been knocked out and you start getting tunnel vision. Then the blackness started to gather, and I was, "Okay, here we go." So I literally had a whoopee. I grabbed my poncho liner and pulled it up over me and went into the fetal position and lied down. And there's what I call the going through the veil, which is all the different colors you've never seen, sacred geometry. You begin to see that, and then you transition through that after 5 or 10 minutes. And the first thing I saw was Kyle, was my wife's deceased son, sitting cross-legged in front of me, and I freaked. I yelled. I yelled out real loud, and then we had a conversation. He and I had this conversation, and it was beautiful, and it was healing, and it was wonderful. And then after a while, the shaman came over, and she talked with me about my rage and my PTSD. and said that she would remove it for me during the weekend. And then she says, I need to go. She spent about a half hour talking with me. Now, if you think about that, she's got 20 guests and only less now, probably more like 5 hours of ceremony left. And she spent a half hour with me. And then she says, listen, I need to go see I need to check in on my other guests. And she said, but before I go, I just want to tell you that it's my pleasure to inform you you're a shaman too. You just don't remember yet. And I literally, the first thought I had was, I don't even remember there being a shaman package when I signed up. Where it was basic and gold.
Yeah. Did I pay for the upgrade? I don't want that. I just want the practical stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just here for the basic course. I didn't come here. So I was really, really confused. And then things got weirder. So I don't know if you want me to go into that or.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think that's part of this, right? There's a practical aspect to this, which is, hey, you can get rid of some of these things, some of these addictions. So there's a scientific approach to the neuroplasticity that you gain. So I think that's part of it, but I also think this spiritual part that you're talking about is part of the experience. And for those thinking about this, preparation is key, right? So I think discussing your personal experiences with the spiritual side as well as your knowledge of the practical neuroplasticity. Yeah, I think that's all part of it. So yeah, feel free to share that initial spiritual journey and what it was like for you.
Yeah. So by the end of the ceremony, that first night, it was it was one of the most beautiful experiences in my life, really. We had done the ceremony on a little tiny plateau. There was kind of a cliff on the far end and a little hill that went up to the condos where we were staying on the near end. And on the near end, there was this giant tree, and everybody had kind of gone. Ceremony was over. She had closed, and everybody had gone up and gone to bed. And I decided to stay, and I sat there under that tree and the moon and the stars, but just like being able to stare off into the horizon for a long distance and in nature and quietness. And the following, I guess, the epiphanies that I had or the takeaways that I was at, number one was God. It's not like the religious God. It's what I like to think of as just creator or source. It's the way I like to describe it to people is I don't believe in any way that I've seen God. But what I do say is that I have basked in the unconditional love of creator. And so that was the first takeaway is just knowing and understanding, okay, this bearded, vengeful version of God that was taught to me from the Bible is not it at all. Like there's so much love in the universe. And that was the first takeaway. The second takeaway was feeling the release inside of me. It felt like somebody had taken a 100-pound rucksack off my. Like I felt new and fresh again. I felt, in fact, one of the things that I wrote down was this was, I had forgotten what happiness felt. I'd forgotten what happiness felt like, and I had that. Another one of those epiphanies was I'm good enough. I keep talking about my wife. She was my girlfriend at this time still. And we had talked about marriage, and then I had an epiphany. Well, the reason I kept asking her to marry me was more out of trying to fill an emptiness and a void in myself. And I had this epiphany sitting on that mountain under that tree, looking out over the valley that like I don't need anybody to complete me. I'm whole. I'm perfect. I'm wonderful. I don't need yeah, like just really deep in my soul, beginning to start to love myself again for the first time in a long time. And through the addiction, through the PTSD, through the arrest, through all the things, the divorces, and just going, oh, wait a minute. Actually, I'm actually okay. I'm a perfect being, a son of the divine creator. Those were some of the main takeaways I remember sitting there that night, not to mention all the other sort of like looking into past lives and connecting with my ancestors, connecting with Pyle and other loved ones that have passed as well.
Was there anything particularly difficult about that ceremony for you?
Not the first one. The difficulty came in the second night. Yeah,
Could you explain that one? Because right now, right, you have this to review. You have this person who's told you you're a shaman. You're okay. Well, I didn't really sign up for that, but what I got, I like. So okay, great. Let's go do more of that for night two. How does night two go for you?
Yeah, so I was grappling. I was really grappling with the whole "you're a shaman" thing. I tried to put it on the back, again, on the back shelf, and I tried to again. I think I know, like I'm looking at my journal, which is right there. I know that I wrote down again. Okay, be the gray man. Stop. Don't stand out. And so we went back into ceremony on night two, and same process. I drank the medicine. It came easier this time. I only needed 1 cup. And then I got into the veil, the colors, the geometry. And then what happened was there was this red dot. All I could see was soupy blackness and this little red dot. And I literally, I think, was in my mind, maybe even physically, if someone had been looking at me, I don't know. But I was doing this. I was trying to a touch screen. And yeah, I was like, I'm on a touch screen.
What's something's there, man?
Yeah, so I'm zooming in, I'm zooming in, I'm zooming in, and finally the red dot turns into a serpentine line. So now I'm like, again, touchscreen. So I kept going like this, and I'm zooming backwards, backwards, backwards to the origin. And I get there, and there's this giant, giant man. He's well over 6'6", 300 pounds, arms like legs, massive. He's carrying an axe, actually. And I wasn't above the serpentine line. I was down on his level and near him, and I started walking towards him. And as I got close, he lunged at me as in to intimidate me and scare me. And I didn't flinch. I was just like, I said, no, not today. And so then what was interesting is he turned and started walking away. And I said the same thing to him. I said, "No, no." I think I yelled, like, "Get your ass back here. We got unfinished business." I knew.
The same conflict you'd had with your dad, right? You were playing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And at the time I didn't know who he was, but I knew that I was supposed to connect with him somehow. And I knew that I was supposed to there was something there for me to resolve. And so then when I yelled for him to get back, he's sort of in defeat. His shoulders slumped down and the axe went down. So now he's like sort of dragging it instead of up at like ready position. And he just kind of like, and then he turned around and came back to me. And I looked him in the eyes, and what I could see was myself and him and me. I could see a man who had gone to war, a man who had done things that had scarred him, a man who also was just a simple father and husband who was trying to care for his tribe and his people and his family. And when I saw the humanity in him,
Then
instinctively
you could see it in yourself.
I could see it in myself. And so what I did was I just instinctively wanted to hug him. And I hugged him and we cried. And you're right. This was me. This is either a former version of me or a metaphor version of me or a past life ancestor. It almost doesn't matter because the lesson is the lesson. And so in the moment that I hugged him and we wept, then I zoomed right back out, and now I was above that serpentine line, and the serpentine line went all the way back to the right, like at this, like was like moving so fast, like you couldn't count it, and it ended with
You're following a timeline now. Like you're zooming.
yes, exactly, and that's exactly what it was because at the other end of the serpentine line was my maternal grandfather, who had been a World War II veteran, and I could see how all that trauma had just not only shaped those decisions and shaped those men's lives into going into military service and being part of that chain, but it also had kept that trauma within that line and understanding how my grandfather dealt with his trauma and how he just swallowed it and didn't talk about it and how because he fought in the Pacific and how that then shaped my mother's emotional maturity or lack thereof, God bless her. And how she wasn't really taught how to process her emotions. So naturally being raised in our home, I wasn't really taught mine either. And I could just see it all so vividly and understand it with absolute clarity. Oh yeah, this is it. This is where this line ends now. This ends now with me. And so yeah, that one was hard and painful a lot of ways. It was very it wasn't like the physical painful type of things that sometimes we see in it, but it was gut wrenching painful to feel the pain of my ancestors and my the warriors and men in my line were going back for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah. How did that night end for you?
Well, what's interesting is that I from night one, the shaman thing kept manifesting itself. Yeah. I could like it was really, really strange. Like, so for example, that kid that I told you about, the one that surfer dude was talking about the intergalactic intervention of nuclear war. Like night one, I actually, when I was walking up to the hill to sit down, and he was one of the last people I saw before he went up after they agreed they would leave me alone, let me stay there. I looked at him, I said, "Oh my God, your name's Loki, and you used to be a navigator on one of my ships when I was a Viking." Like I said that so impromptu, without thought, like spontaneously, that after I said it, I was like, I kind of stepped back. What did I just say? Where did those words come from? And then he said to me, he's like, "Yeah, I was wondering if you'd recognize me." So what ended up happening, and I don't want any of this to discourage anybody else from doing plant medicine. Know that my experience was sort of one in a million, I think, because of, well, just that was my path. But what I ended up doing for both nights, like my journeys would end before others. And so really at a certain point, I sort of transitioned into staff. That shaman was okay with it. And again, that's very uncharacteristic that someone goes from guest to staff in the middle of the ceremony. But night one and night two, really at a certain point, I started helping people and following like her guidance and direction.
And do you think that's the moment you wanted to be a shaman, or did you still, after that weekend, have reservations about it?
No,
And yeah, how did
no,
it?
the only reason I participated and kind of followed her lead and did the things that I was doing on nights one and two in that first retreat was because it was kind of like the Green Beret in me, just kind of stepping up. Okay, I know what she's doing, and there was past life memory coming out in me that also knew instinctively what to do. And so I was, well, let me just lend a hand type of attitude. I had no like after that retreat was over, like the first morning after, which was Sunday morning when my wife picked me up, that was a really, really hard conversation. Trying to explain that I'd spent the weekend with her son. I think I'm a shaman, so let's process that. That was no, but no, I actually was really, really resistant to it for the better part of I won't yeah, but several months. It I kept trying to prove it wrong. So I went to another shaman. I found another shaman here in Utah who did what we call runes readings, which is Nordic divination. And I went to her and she did my runes. And after about an hour or a half hour of looking at them, she just finally closed all of her books and leaned forward. And before she even told me the rest of the runes reading, she just said, "Has anybody told you recently that you might be a shaman?" And I was just, son of a bitch, man. Okay, this is getting weirder and weirder at every turn. And then what finally convinced me that it was real was I found another ayahuasca ceremony because once you're kind of in the know how to find them, then it made it easier. So I went to another ayahuasca ceremony now several months later, again to disprove it and or to see what would happen the second time. And before that ceremony started, I thought to myself, well, I know that the people, these woohoo people, they meditate. So maybe I'll try meditating before. So I went to a nearby park and I sat down. It was near a lake. This was in Missouri. And I was sitting beside this lake on the grass. I'm okay. I started breathing the way that I'd seen people breathe. I closed my eyes. And probably within, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, I had left my body and I was hovering up here. And what happened in that moment was 40 years of repressed memories came flooding back. So when I was a child, I used to be able to leave my body, which we call astral projection. And I used to be able to move energy, and I used to be able to talk to plants and animals. And I took that to my dad and said, "Hey, Dad, what's it like for you when you see dead people, talk to plants and animals, all these things?" And my dad, again, well intentioned, I love the man, God bless him, but he was also clergy in our local Mormon faith. And he just said, "That's satanic worship, son. Don't ever do that again." And me wanting to be the good, dutiful son, I apparently suppressed that so deeply in my subconscious that if you had asked me before that meditation if I had any memory of that, I would have said, "What are you even talking about? Like, that's crazy." But the moment I left my body, it was like, "Oh shit, okay, holy cow, I remember all this now." And that's when for the first time where I was like, okay, it's not these external people telling me, it's not these external sources. I remember it and remember these gifts. And so that's when I finally embraced it and went back to the woman who did the runes reading and said, I want to be your apprentice. I don't know how to ask that, but I'm here to ask if I can apprentice with you." And that started my first of 4 apprenticeships. So I've studied with 2 people who do plant medicine. I've studied with 2 people who don't do plant medicine, and 2 in the US, 1 in South America, and 1 in Sweden. So
All right. So that's your shamanic path, right? How do you how did you reconcile or was it necessary sort of your military background with the path you're now walking? Do they
no,
each other or how did that work out in
y-
your mind?
yeah, when we first started doing ceremonies, there was this woman that I worked with a lot. She ran a hospice center and was just really gifted and experienced with plant medicine. And we had a really good facilitator, co-facilitator relationship for a lot of years. And one time she said to me, she's, "Matt, you really need to drop the military mannerisms and things." Because like one of my rules was like leaders eat last, right? Is that McCraven that said that or McChrystal? One of those two, I think, wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last. And that's the way it is for military leadership in the good units, right? You take care of the Joes first, and then if there's anything left over, you get something. And we were doing a ceremony, and I went into the kitchen one time, maybe to get a candle or light some matches or something. And like, she's in there snacking on the meal and meanwhile, we got these guests. They've gone through a diet. They haven't eaten a solid meal in 36 hours. They've been on juice, and now they're puking their guts out. And I just, after the ceremony, I'm like, "Look, leaders eat last." And she later she came back and she's like, "Yeah, you really need to drop all the military mannerisms. You're not there anymore." And for half a minute, not literally, but for a couple of days, a half minute there, I really thought about what she said. And maybe I do need to drop all of that. And then at a certain point, I was like, "Well, no, of course not." Like what it was Source telling me, like in meditation and prayer about this, like Source kind of came through and said, "Trust me, we've been preparing you for your shamanic role your whole life. Like what you did in the military was key and essential, not only to being somebody that other military people can come to that's less woohoo, but you're going to resonate with them. We've been preparing you all along. Don't shed it." And furthermore, like the thing that I love, like one of the things I really loved about Green Berets was De Oppresso Liber. Like we had this mission of freeing the oppressed. And in my mind, like the mission just continues today. Like we're just freeing the oppressed, but now we're freeing them from the oppression of mental illness and addiction and yeah.
And so to that end, transitioning so from woohoo to the practical aspects of this, what what plant medicines do you work with, and how do you think they impact PTSD and other mental health issues, addictions, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So in order for us to practice this, and me and others like me form churches. We designate these plant medicines as sacraments. And so within our church, our statement of beliefs is that we believe that as humans, we stand the greatest potential for wellness and healing and abundance in and through nature. And we embrace all forms of nature. We can interpret our interaction with nature how we see fit and how those that come to ceremony with us see fit. And so we include a variety of, so we do include cannabis, psilocybin, ayahuasca, acacia, San Pedro, and peyote in our worship. We feel that that's also safer because it allows everybody to get the medicine that is more aligned to them and to the particular their needs. So we work with a wide variety of sacraments. I think that primarily ayahuasca or acacia are the most capable at handling PTSD. The way that it works is there's kind of three things that happen. Number one is the purge, and everybody is somehow resistant to purging. They don't want to purge. They don't want to vomit in front of people. And really, truly, I can't emphasize enough that that is the most sacred part of this. You need that. Think of that purge. It's not biological. If you've ever been around somebody who's gotten sick on a burrito, it is not the same thing that you purge in an ayahuasca ceremony. It's entirely different. And it's actually your illnesses, your addictions, it's all that negative energy coming out. And so the purge is the perhaps the most sacred part of it. So that's one thing that happens. The second thing, and I kind of talked to that in my ceremony, is where you get an energetic reset, where you just feel light and reset and new again. And then thirdly is the neuroplasticity. So what happens is parts of your brain get activated during ceremony that don't normally get activated. And then on top of that, those active molecules leave a 30-day period of neuroplasticity and actually neurogenesis. So it isn't like somehow magic fairy comes and waves a wand and your addictions automatically disappear. What happens now is that the the ruts, if you will, that you kind of get into living a human life that contribute to those addictions, you are now outside of that rut. You're now outside of that thinking that it's broken those patterns. And so now you can actually deal with your addictions, your alcoholism, your PTSD on an equal playing field because you're not trying to overcome 20 years of addiction.
And so when you're screening people to participate or screening veterans who want to participate or come to you, how does that process go? And is there anyone that you come across that's maybe perhaps not a good candidate, or how do you treat them, and what's the process to sort of get ready for a ceremony?
Yeah. So for us, anybody who's leading the ceremony, it's their responsibility to head this process. But essentially, it starts with an intake call and an intake form, and you're right. We're screening for a couple different things. One is just kind of suitability. Like, do they have the right mindset? Do they understand that it's not a magic bullet? It's not a finish line. That the work, and that's part of our responsibility in educating them in that too, and seeing if that resonates with them and if they understand that the work begins after ceremony and will they do the work. The second thing that we have to screen for is physical suitability. We're primarily screening for like cardiovascular issues because it will raise your blood pressure and your heart rate. But we also have to screen for what meds they're on. I will say that we don't necessarily believe in saying no. What we believe in doing is saying you're not suitable at this time. However, let's talk about how to become suitable. So if somebody's on a bunch of big pharma, which can cause what we call serotonin syndrome, which is it can be a permanent condition where they no longer are able to process serotonin, meaning they'll never enjoy life again. So we can't have that in ceremony. So what we have to do is we have to maybe take them and say, okay, listen, you're going to need at least 3 months, 90 days. So let's put you in the ceremony 90 days out. And then the third thing that we screen for, and this is the trickiest one, is psychological disorders such as schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder. Because if somebody's never been diagnosed with it, they can truthfully answer the question, no, I've never been diagnosed with schizophrenia. But and so we have to do a lot of sort of, for lack of better words, divination, like meditation, listening to source, following our instincts about whether or not somebody in ceremony may or may not have been undiagnosed with some real serious complications.
Yeah, and so now they're ready for the ceremony. they prepared, right? They're suitable. They went through the process, the diet, whatever else they need to prep on to get there. So explain like sort of how does a ceremony work for you? How does that weekend transpire? What happens?
Yeah, perfect. So we actually believe that the ceremony can last anywhere from, let's say, 6 weeks to 12 weeks, depending, right? We believe that ceremony starts on the moment you say you're in, because the universe is at play here. I always talk about this diamond. There's four elements to it. There's the divine at the top, there's the participant, there's the medicine, and then there's the facilitator or shaman. And the least of those is the shaman. So you have to understand that the divine is very heavily involved in this process. And so when you as a participant say, okay, Matt, I'm in, like life gets a little weird on you. And that I'm just saying that from experience. I'm not trying to project that on anybody, but what I've noticed is that the things that you want to work on, the universe is going to start bringing those up in you, and so that you can feel really raw going into ceremony. So that's why I say ceremony begins the moment you say yes, and that might be 3 months out or 3 weeks out. And then you go through all, like you said, the diet, the preparation, the meditations, the intention setting, and then ceremony, and then the 30 days of neuroplasticity, where we put an emphasis on integration throughout those 30 days, which is really the most important part. So, but back to more specifically your question. So we ask people to arrive. We like to get them in. We do an interview. We double check on the things. Did you do the diet? Are you off your SSRIs? When was the last time you had a drink? Things like that. Then we talk about their dose. And then we've done that and gotten everybody settled and situated, we like to start ceremony. And then with a meal, it takes us to about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, because people want to talk and integrate and download what happened with everybody. And we find that it's really, really important to help people come back into their bodies to reset for day two. So we might do something like cold plunging, yoga, breath work, chai or qigong, just something for us to kind of reset energetically, get us back into our bodies, feel connected. And then we'll go into night two of ceremony. So we do men facilitators holding ceremony for men, and women holding ceremony for women. And so at the end of the second ceremony, we usually like to transition out to a fire pit, and we like to do what we call a fire ceremony, where we can write down things that we want to leave behind, and we do it in a ceremonial fashion and put those into the fire. And then we get up and do another meal, and we do the first of three integration sessions, and we do what we call 1-1-1 integration. We do it on day one, week one, and month one. So that first integration session is to help people to really understand their first couple steps over the next 72 hours to the next week. Okay, this is how you're going to need to take care of your body. Here's some helpful tips. Here's some practices, like those types of things, giving them more resources to take those first couple steps beyond ceremony.
And Matt, you mentioned integration. So for people that aren't familiar with that, like who does that for your church? Who leads? What are their qualifications to kind of help people through that?
Yeah, so like integration is, and thank you for highlighting that. Integration really is just the process of integrating the ceremonial experience, the actual drinking and the psychedelic experience into your daily life. Again, you got this 30 days of neuroplasticity. It's that starting line. So it's really, really important that you bring that in and use that 30 days of neuroplasticity to make lifelong changes, the real change. That's where it comes from. And so integration is critical. In fact, if you're thinking about sitting with somebody and they don't talk about integration or offer integration, like that's a giant red flag. Please run away. But we have the most wonderful integration coach in our church that runs it. There's probably the foremost psychedelic organization, like academic organization in the world, is called MAPS. It's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They've been around, I think, since the 80s. Great organization, and they train integration coaches. And so our integration coach is the MAPS certified psychedelic integration coach as well. And so she leads the second and third of those two integrations post ceremony.
So it sounds like you really take the integration, obviously, what you described very seriously as part of this. And from the ceremony itself, it's, as you mentioned, it's a church, it's spiritually based. What sort of religion would you call it, or what sort of religions fit into this ceremony?
Yeah, I love that question because I've had everybody from atheist to agnostic, Catholic, Protestant, Jew, Muslim, Mormon, the Jehovah's Witness, every faith and every non-faith has been part of our ceremonies. I I and everybody generally everybody leaves as they came. We're not here to change anybody's religion or and actually a lot of the work that we do here, especially in Utah, is helping people process their religious trauma too. That could be a topic for a whole nother podcast. We're a spiritual minded practice. We do our best to help connect people with nature, and we really mean that seriously in the sense that both the plants and the molecules that we use are directly from nature, but also in the activities going forward through integration, such as grounding, cold plunging, forest therapy, things like that that hopefully become tools for these participants to use in a lifelong process of healing and growing.
Yeah. And previously, Matt, you sort of talked about seeing this as this mission, right? Your new mission as a shaman, as a continuation of your service to others, in service to the veteran population. What do you think's one of the biggest sort of misconceptions people have about plant medicine?
Yeah, so I love this question because it's really timely. I had a conversation with a gentleman yesterday who served in after his SF time, served in Ground Branch. And even though he didn't hasn't come to our ceremonies, he's done a number of ceremonies. And he and I met through work, and he we were having a conversation yesterday because he has another fellow friend here in Salt Lake who sounds like he's drinking himself to death in a really rapid fashion. And this friend of mine was trying to talk to his other friend saying, why won't you go do this? Like Matt's like a stone's throw away. Come on, brother. And the guy said, to answer your question, I'm afraid. And I get it. I mean, I do. Like I was afraid, but I was also desperate. My desperation outweighed my fear. But what I would tell anybody that's experienced that is, first of all, instead of fear, have some like transition it into respect. And I think that's a healthy way to approach plant medicine, is to approach it from a really respectful place and do the process, do the work, do the prep. But secondly, know that whatever it is that you're afraid of seeing on the other side of that veil is stuff that you already put in your subconscious anyway. There is nothing in there that you aren't the author of, that you're not the creator of. You put it in there and it's there anyway. So do you want to keep living with those demons in the basement, or do you want to go down there in the basement and bust the door open and flush them out the root cellar and get rid of them? I'm all about getting rid of those demons. So it's not as scary as you are most of you are thinking it is, really, to be awesome.
And so, in service to others and talking to those veterans around the brink and having these conversations, do you feel like plant medicine will ever reach that sort of mainstream where it's accepted as a treatment?
I do. There's an organization out there called Third Wave, and the reason they're called Third Wave is they get their nickname from this being the third wave of psychedelic movements, right? I think the second one was the 70s. And like guys like Timothy Leary, who were some of the leaders and figureheads of that second wave, they did damage. They literally openly talked about like getting 10 gallons of LSD and dumping it in San Francisco municipal water supply to help wake up the world. And okay, I mean, while your intention or your desired outcome is great, that's horribly executed. And so we are in the third wave. I do believe that the internet being what it is, for all of its flaws, and social media for all of its flaws, one of its virtues is the fact that it's getting harder to suppress information. And so I think that we're all beginning to wake up, especially after the early 2000s opioid epidemic in this country. I think we're all becoming a little bit more aware, a little bit more thoughtful and deliberate in our decision making when it comes to what we choose to put into our bodies and how we choose to treat our physical and mental illnesses. And so I don't know how they'll ever roll back the clock on this. I mean, we're all probably products of the dare generation, and looking back on that, I it's kind of humorous to me because there was so much misinformation and lies and deception and propaganda in that. And obviously, we have some horrible drugs that are in our society that we have to protect ourselves from. But here's let me just give you one quick classical definition. Like the 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 true definition of a plant medicine is that it's not addictive and it's not fatal. So you can there's no way on earth that you could like, I think it's your body weight. You'd have to eat your body weight in 24 hours of psilocybin for it to be fatal. Yeah. So again, we're and even through things like this in this podcast, putting information out there, helping people to become aware. I don't think it'll ever go away. I think we are moving closer and closer to acceptance. I like to say the problem doesn't matter until it matters. Like, so if you might have been somebody who was totally opposed to, let's say, gay marriage, and then you have a child who is gay, and all of a sudden you love their spouse as much as you love them, and it didn't matter to you until it mattered. I kind of feel like that's the way it's going with plant medicine. Like at a certain point, some people out there who've been taking antidepressants for 20 years are probably going to stop and say, I don't think this is working. And then they're going to look for something that does. And that's the other thing too. Like that, I think that one of the reasons why the government and big pharma and big business are so oppressive towards it is because there's no subscription based model. I don't go to the pharmacy once a month and get my month's worth of little orange bottles, right? Like I can take this and I can have a ceremony and for the most part be done. And then I can do some PMCS, so to speak, occasionally when life's building up on me, but it's not a daily subscription.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier a red flag being, hey, if you find somebody, they're not offering integration. But so to walk that back just a little bit. So if somebody's looking for a safe practitioner, a legitimate, how do they find that? What, are there steps to finding someone that is legitimate?
Yeah. So the first one I'll throw out is word of mouth, right? We've been operating for about 5 years and it's all been word of mouth. And I think that's really one of our strongest endorsements. So the first thing I'd recommend is be brave enough to ask people in your circle if they've ever done it. Like one of my funniest stories is when, and I think you may have a similar experience where someone says, hey, I want to ask you a sensitive question. Have you ever done this? Oh, let's talk. Yeah. This is my favorite thing. And then like you find people if you're willing to broach the topic and then ask for recommendations. And then secondly, I think that you need to, if they don't have an intake process, that's a giant red flag. If you can't talk to the shaman and ask your questions, if you can't ask, well, what goes into the medicine and how do you make the medicine and how is the medicine administered? You can't ask those questions. That's a big red flag. The other thing too is, do they have things such as safety protocols in place? We have, when that 2 week start for us, you receive a thing called My Road to Wellness. And it's about I think it's about a 20-page packet. It talks about the pharmacology of the medicine. It talks about your intention setting, the diet, the packing list. It also gives you outside of our organization resources for both ethics and integration should something not fit right for you with us. We have an ethics adjudicator within us, our process as well. So, and then finally, integration. If they don't talk about or acknowledge or offer integration, I feel like that's a giant red flag as well. And then maybe the last one is a medic. We ensure that there's either a medic or a nurse. Our medic is also like I said, we try to do mostly veterans, by veterans, for veterans. And so we have a Purple Heart recipient medic who was born up in Iraq, so on Veterans Day, and he came to our ceremonies and then volunteered, and now he's our full time medic. So some of those are the keys to look out for.
What would you say to someone who is, you talk about, hey, somebody's on the brink, talking about that, but okay, they're ready to commit. What other resources do they need to be looking at, and or how do they get in touch with you and learn more about possibly attending a retreat?
So in order to get a hold of me, you just go to matt@naturalworship.org. You can email us there, or just go to naturalworship.org, or you can also find us at Natural Worship on Facebook and Instagram. In terms of committing, like really truly, the first step is reaching out to us. We'll give you a list of dates of ceremonies that are coming up. That kind of determines who you do your intake call with. And if you're undetermined on date, I'll probably be the one that does your intake call. And then we just kind of work through the logistics of that, like what dates and when you're going to go, and kind of put you in the queue, so to speak. There's a few things that we greatly emphasize post ceremony, but they don't need to be post ceremony. And so I highly suggest cold plunging. It it's powerful. It's powerfully healing. It resets your central nervous system. So it's another way. It's kind of like doing a little 5-minute journey, psychedelic journey, and then you come out of it and you get several hours of euphoria throughout your body. And maybe the one of the ones that I recommend the most is meditation. There's so much resistance to meditation, and brothers and sisters, I got to tell you, man, like you need to get on meditation, and it's not as hard as you're making it out. Everybody thinks you need to clear your mind, and you don't clear your mind. Your mind will never be clear and empty. Your mind is programmed through what they call the default mode network to constantly be putting a thought into your brain. So it's not about emptying your brain. It's about training your brain on what thought to think. Okay, so just go to YouTube and type in guided meditation 5 minutes, start there. And you can even put in the topic guided meditation for resiliency. And all you got to do is concentrate on the voice coming out of your phone. That's a place to start. But more than I think that meditation maybe perhaps is one of the strongest. And then actually I'll make a plug for kombucha too, if I can, real quick. I talked about serotonin syndrome, and if you lose serotonin, you can't feel joy. So dopamine is more of your pleasure. That's what actually leads to addiction, because there's a dopamine release when you're engaged in that whatever activity. Well, serotonin is your happy chemical. It's the one that helps you feel inner peace. And 95% of your serotonin is made in your gut. So you need to take care of your gut biome. And one of the best ways you can do that is by drinking a glass of kombucha a day or eating some sauerkraut every day. Not the kind on the shelf, the kind you get in the cooler that's non-pasteurized sauerkraut, or make your own. And that will restore your gut biome, and you'll start producing serotonin. You'll start a lot better.
Thanks, Matt. And Matt, I appreciate the conversation today. One, being willing in a lot of ways to talk about demons, talk about, as you said, the woohoo aspects of being involved in plant medicine. So I appreciate your openness, your candor on that. Is there anything at the end of this that you'd like to say, or like people to know that we maybe didn't cover, or an aspect of this that we didn't get to?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, there's one thing that kind of came to me, and because again, I'm happy to talk about my struggle with suicide. I'm happy to put that out there, because we demonize it so much that it becomes almost taboo to talk about. And recent studies show that as little as 8 minutes in present conversation with another human being is enough to talk them off the ledge. You may not even know that they're on a ledge. But even more importantly, one of the things I hate seeing on Facebook is the passive aggressive. I know that all my friends are going to see this, but only the 3 real ones are going to post the Veterans Crisis Line. It's like, okay, brother, I appreciate that you posted the Veterans Crisis Line, but I'm not going to get baited into a passive aggressive, now I got to copy and paste it too type of thing, right? And furthermore, I think that it's like, that's really kind of like washing our hands of the responsibility. I know right now, if I said to you, hey, Fred, if I called you in crisis, would you pick up the phone? I know you'd say yes. We would all say yes. But that's the real easy work. The hard work is to say, hey, Fred, will you call me if you're in crisis? That's two brothers having a real conversation about making promises to one another that, hey, you're going to be part of my PACE, primary alternate contingency emergency plan, when I get into crisis. Instead of because what we're saying to the community is, hey, if you're in crisis, raise your hand and I'll listen. Well, every single one of us that get into crisis are so reluctant to raise our hands because just Command Sergeant Major Bill Thetford had to do an all hands in the JSOC here and say, look, it's okay to be a little broken. And so we spend so much of our time and energy suppressing our willingness to raise our hand and say, hey, I'm struggling today. So have that real conversation. Say, hey, if you're struggling, will you promise to call me? I'll be there for you, but you need to be the one that's willing to call me. Will you stop suffering in silence? And ask that of your buddies.
Yeah. And I had a conversation about that recently. I love that. I love that point because it goes back to, yeah, right at the beginning when we started talking about this, right? Our resistance to heal. Because if we are King Kong ain't got nothing on me, if we are ego forward, right? We're that that guy that guy that thinks that way is not raising his hand. He's not reaching out. So
Yep.
it really does take someone else putting an arm around them, giving them the hug, right? Loving them back into a place where, hey man, you can give yourself compassion. You can heal, and there's a place for you. So I love that sentiment, Matt. And again, thanks for being on today, brother. Love you.
Love you too, brother. Thanks for everything. Thanks for having me.